Hi there, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is you're watching this. Welcome to Left Side of the Aisle. I'm Larry Erickson. I'm going to be your ranter and raconteur for the next half hour or so, talking about things that I certainly think are worthy of your attention. You can always send any comments or reactions to the show. You can send them to me directly at my personal email, which is whoviating, WHOVIATING at AOL.com. Or you can go to my website, Lotus Surviving a Dark Time, and the URL will be right here. You can go there and you can get the email address from there, or you can leave a comment there if you'd rather do that. If you do send me email, please include something in the subject line to make it clear this is not spam, and be a little patient about getting an answer because I just hate answering email and it takes me forever to get around to it. But I will answer. You will get an answer. All right, with that, we're going to start, as I always like to, with a little bit of good news. And this good news actually involves fracking, or what's formerly called hydraulic fracturing. This is the process of forcing fluids, which often contain toxic chemicals, under high pressure down into oil or natural gas wells in order to fracture the surrounding rock so that any oil or gas in that rock can flow more freely into the well, increasing the production and the productivity of the well. The practice has become controversial. It's been linked to contamination of water supplies in Texas and Pennsylvania, as well as to earthquakes in Ohio, Oklahoma, and several other states. However, the fossil fuel industry continues to push the practice because, frankly, it's more profitable to them, and, damn the consequences. The consequences which, in fact, can be and have been dismissed, denied, or simply ignored. State governments, too often under the thumb of those same sort of powerful corporate interests, have generally done more to protect the corporations than the safety and health of their citizens. For example, last year, the residents of the city of Denton, Texas, voted overwhelmingly to ban fracking within the city limits, only to have the state of Texas shrug and say, in effect, yeah, who cares what you think, frack baby frack. All right, so in light of all that, what's the good news? Well, the good news is that not every state is under the thumb of these fossil fuel corporations. The state of New York has now officially banned fracking within its borders. Speaking for the state's Department of Environmental Conservation, Commissioner Joe Martins called the ban the only reasonable alternative, noting that fracking, quoting him, poses significant adverse impacts to land, air, water, natural resources, and potential significant public health impacts that cannot be adequately mitigated. Now, this, of course, is not the end of it for New York. There will be the corporate lawsuits and the corporate-funded lawsuits, supposedly from some little guy whose rights are being violated. But still, at least this means that this time the corporations and their allies are the ones who are on the defensive. And that is always good news. Now, speaking of fossil fuels and the corporations that will suck the earth dry in pursuit of profit, brings me to one of the things that I intended to talk about this week, global warming, aka climate change. Now, of course, the big news in that regard was the Pope's encyclical on climate change, which succeeded in doing what no amount of scientific evidence actually could. It cast global warming as a moral issue, demanded the world's rich nations begin paying their grave social debt to the poor nations who they have exploited, even as those same rich nations have adopted what he called a cheerful recklessness in their approach to the Earth's environment and its resources, with the result of generating global climate change that presents an undeniable risk to what he called a common home that is beginning to resemble a pile of filth, with the greatest impact of that global warming to be felt by the same poor nations that have already borne the greatest burdens of our indifference. The developed countries, this is quoting Pope Francis, the developed countries ought to help pay this debt by significantly limiting their consumption of non-renewable energy and by assisting poor countries to support policies and programs of sustainable development. But, he insisted, instead, those who possess more resources and economic or political power seem mostly concerned with masking the problems or concealing their symptoms, pointing to the loss of what he called a sense of responsibility for our fellow men and women upon which all civil society is founded. It was overall a powerful statement whose moral call was founded on scientific fact, and whose moral argument drew strength from the, no pun intended, chilling reality of those facts. Just consider that 2014 was worldwide the warmest year on records dating back to 1880, and that 13 of the 15 warmest years on that record have occurred since 2000. And 2015 is poised to break that record if the rest of the year is like the beginning. Notice this graph here. It shows the temperatures and the 5-year running average global temperatures going up and up and up. That star on the top, that's where 2015 will be if the rest of 2015 is like the beginning. And what's more, 2 new studies, both published in the peer-reviewed science journal Nature Climate Change, concluded that, yes, there is a connection between global warming and increases in severe weather. That is, events like Superstorm Sandy, the extended drought in the western U.S., and other severe weather events are more likely to occur more often because of human-driven climate change. Now, interestingly, the 2 studies done independently of each other examined different means by which climate change could hypothetically affect severe weather, either through thermodynamics, which is the interaction of heat and energy and moisture and so on, or through a change in atmospheric or ocean currents. That is, to see the impact of global warming on each of those things, to see how it would affect global weather patterns. Different teams, different methods, different focuses, same conclusion. Global warming increases severe weather. Severe weather not just like storms and droughts, but heat waves, like the one now sweeping into Western Europe, which has already seen London experience its hottest July day ever, and the one in Karachi, Pakistan, the heat wave there, which has so far killed over 1,200 people as temperatures reached 113 degrees Fahrenheit. And please don't look for future comfort in this so-called hiatus or pause in global warming that the nanny naysayers bark and bray about. Not only do the temperature records of 2014 and 2015 kick that notion aside, the reevaluation of existing data by NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, suggests that this pause or hiatus never actually existed. Global temperatures may not have been rising as dramatically as they had in the previous decade, but they still were going overall. They were still going up. NASA, which actually also addresses climate change, says it will take the agency a little time to see if it agrees with NOAA's reevaluation, but that assumes NASA will even be able to do it. You see, the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee has passed out a proposed budget for NASA that would cut more than $300 million from its program of Earth studies, which includes its studies of climate change. This is the right-wing version of putting your fingers in your ears and going, la, 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 I can't hear you. Which, of course, won't help, but might help is a move in various places to divest from fossil fuels. That is, to withdraw your investments from the industry, often being done now under the slogan, keep it in the ground. This is, of course, actually now backed by the United Nations, and which makes sense even to Sir Mark Moody Stewart, the former chair of Shell Oil, who condemned the lack of progress in his industry in addressing climate change and called divestment a rational approach. Now, unfortunately, however, a significant phrase in that description is former chairman. It often seems true that it's only when these people get out of the industry, when they've left behind the mental trap of the day-to-day, what's most profitable for us behind, it's only when they've left that focus behind that folks such as Moody Stewart can recognize their failings and failures on environmental issues. When they're still inside the industry, well, Consider the case of Tom Altmaier. He is a lobbyist for Arch Coal, which is the second biggest coal producer in the United States. He responded to Pope Francis's encyclical by saying that if he really cared about social justice, the Pope would be promoting fossil fuels. That is, he would be pushing for more pollution, more global warming, and more coal. Now, those sorts of forces, such as Altmaier represents, along with their lackeys in Congress, are what we have to overcome. Now, I'll be honest, I have no faith that we will. I have no faith that our children, and even more our grandchildren, will not grow up in a world darkened by the predicted but ignored results of our own cheerful recklessness. I fear rather that they will grow up in a world where severe weather, where hurricanes, droughts, floods, heat waves, as well as environmental refugees and resource wars are common experiences. So here's a challenge for all you right-wingers out there. Make a fool of the lefty. Prove him incredibly, totally, hopelessly wrong. Not by denying climate change, not by denying reality, but by doing something about it, and by doing enough to change that future. Make a fool out of me, and I'll thank you for it. Moving on from there, we have a Hero Award this week, something we give out here on occasion when occasion arises to an individual, or as in this case, a group, that just does the right thing on a matter big or small. I think even as the Boy Scouts of America continue to struggle, fuss, and fume, trying to come up with policies that are sufficiently non-discriminatory to get them out from under the burden of the criticism without actually having to be non-discriminatory, the Girl Scouts of America is making a change. In May, the GSA said it would accept transgender children. Specifically, quote, if the child is recognized by the family and the school and community as a girl and lives culturally as a girl, well, then the Girl Scouts will say she's a girl. Which seems so simple, you'd wonder why anybody would have a problem with it. Now that, in fact, would be enough for the award, but there's more. Around that same time, an unnamed donor sent $100,000 to the Girl Scouts of Western Washington with a note saying that they wanted the chapter to, quote, guarantee that our gift will not be used to support transgender girls. If you can't, return the money. Now, even though that amount, that $100,000, was about a quarter of the group's entire fundraising goal for the year, the chapter did precisely that. Council CEO Megan Furland is her name. She included a note when they returned the money with a note saying, Girl Scouts is for every girl. So good on them. By the way, as a footnote, the chapter of the Girl Scouts set up an Indiegogo fundraising page to try to replace the $100,000 that they gave back. In little more than a day, they had raised over $216,000 from over 4,000 contributors. Fitting reward for heroes. All right, now for one of our regular features, it's the Clown Award. And this week, the Big Red Nose goes to Arkansas pastor Tim Brooks. On a radio show called Wall Builders Live, which is hosted by fundamentalist Christian wacko David Barton, Brooks asserted that America has gone the way of Sodom and Gomorrah. And he then declared that the only thing that will satisfy the homosexual agenda, and it's very clear, he says, the only thing that will satisfy the homosexual agenda is participation. And he meant that literally and said so in so many words. Quoting, we want you to come out of your house and participate with us. Come out and have sex with us. They're going to force participation, and that's what we're seeing around the country. It's unsafe in a city where the homosexual agenda has control. Now, what really makes this whole thing bizarre is that in saying this, Brooks refers to the story of Lot and the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. The story is found in Genesis chapter 19, verses 1 to 11. It says, 2 angels came to Sodom, and Lot took them into his house. But before they went to sleep, the men of the city surrounded the house and demanded, Lot, bring out the 2 strangers that we may know them. Lot goes out and responds by saying, I have 2 daughters who have not known any man. Let me bring them out to you, and do with them as you please, only do nothing to these men. The crowd spurns the offer and tries to break in, but the strangers pull Lot back inside and strike the men in the crowd with some sort of blindness that makes them unable to find Lot's door. Now, the lesson Pastor Brooks takes from this is, quoting him, Lot was not forcing his lifestyle on them. Lot never tried to force his lifestyle on them. He never even brought that up. They are trying to force their lifestyle on him. But note that Lot's way of dealing with the situation was to offer his 2 virgin daughters to be gang raped by a mob. Now, it's hard to see how that bit slipped by the notice of Pastor Brooks, but on the other hand, I suppose it's easy if you're a clown like Tim Brooks. By the way, a very quick footnote to that, you may be interested in knowing Sodom and Gomorrah were not destroyed over homosexuality. They were destroyed because their inhabitants were selfish, greedy, inhospitable, prideful, and idolatrous. The destruction is mentioned twice, once in Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 49. This was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, excess of food, and prosperous ease, but did not aid the poor and needy. While Isaiah chapter 1 verses 10 to 17 refers to, in the voice of God, saying to the people of Sodom to stop bringing me sacrifices, stop making prayers, I will not listen. Do good, seek justice, rescue the oppressed, defend the orphan, plead for the widow. It was that failure, according to the Bible, that resulted in the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, and we are taking a break. And we're back. And Pastor Brooks is actually a nice lead into it, so let's talk about it. It was Friday, June 26th. The crowds were there, waiting, expecting. Inside, the visitor galleries were full, waiting to hear the decision of the Supreme Court in the case known as Obergefell v. Hodges. Anthony Kennedy, writing for the majority, began to read his opinion. After a short while, the tenor, the direction of the ruling became clear. The smiles started, the tears started. Word was brought outside where the smiles and tears could be joined to hugs, kisses, and cheers. It was happening. It was really happening. No longer may this liberty be denied, Kennedy said, before ending his opinion with these words, quoting, no union is more profound than marriage, for it embodies the highest ideals of love, fidelity, devotion, sacrifice, and family. In forming a marital union, 2 people become something greater than once they were. As some of the petitioners in this case demonstrate, marriage embodies a love that may even endure past death. It would misunderstand these men and women to say they disrespect the idea of marriage. Their plea is that they do respect it so deeply that they seek to find its fulfillment for themselves. Their hope is not to be condemned to live in loneliness, excluded from one of civilization's oldest institutions. They ask for equal dignity in the eyes of the law. The Constitution grants them that right. The judgment of the Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit is reversed. And it was done. Bans on the right of same-sex couples to marry are unconstitutional. The fundamental right to marry, long recognized by the Supreme Court, cannot be denied based on the gender of the person you love. Now, there were, of course, dissents. The decision was 5-4, just as many had predicted, and the dissents came from the expected quarters, the foul 4. For example, John Roberts was grousing that the Constitution doesn't contain the word same-sex marriage or something. It wasn't actually clear to me what Roberts is arguing. And perhaps that's because, to me at least, the weirdest part of his dissent came near the beginning when he said, and I quote, "The fundamental right to marry does not include a right to make a state change its definition of marriage." Then how do you have a fundamental right to marry if you can only marry someone that the state approves of? I mean, do you have a fundamental right to vote if you can only vote for officially approved candidates and parties? Do you have a fundamental right to speech if what you say has to be chosen from an officially prescribed list? I mean, ultimately what it seems to me is that Justice Roberts really doesn't have an argument here, and he's just saying nothing at all beyond the notion that he finds same-sex marriage kind of icky and just wishes the court wouldn't have nothing to do with it. Sam Alito, for his part, ranted that the majority decision, quote, "will be used to vilify Americans who are unwilling to assent to the new orthodoxy." He noted that the majority compared so-called traditional marriage laws to laws that denied equal treatment to African Americans and women. The implications of this analogy, said in language that should have been illustrated with a close-up picture of his face lit from below, the implications of this analogy will be exploited by those who are determined to stamp out every vestige of dissent. Which actually sounds to me like what he's actually predicting is that anti-LGBT bias will become as unacceptable in polite society as anti-racial bias supposedly is now. And oddly, he seems to think that's a bad thing. And then there was Antonin Scalia, my favorite Supreme Court justice, ranting about a threat to democracy in a dissent that was, like most of his opinions, quite Shakespearean. That is, a tale told by an idiot full of sound and fury signifying nothing. The caustic brew of vitriol and incoherence stirred up by the Foul Four only served to put the decision in sharper relief. Their fury only serves to show that they know as well as the majority knows the importance of what has happened. Make no mistake, this is an historic decision. This is our generation's Loving v. Virginia, which struck down bans on interracial marriage, a decision which was decried at the time as a violation of traditional marriage. This is our Brown v. Board of Education, which banned racial segregation in public schools. This is a decision having real impact now and for the future on unknown numbers of lives and the rights of Americans. Obergefell v. Hodges will be referred to in the future as a case that significantly advanced human rights in this country. And this is a decision, even as I've said here over and over again, and even as I was saying before I had here to say it in, I kept saying justice will come. On this, justice will come. Even so, it's a decision that just a few years ago I wouldn't have thought would come this soon. And in fact, not many years before that, I wondered if it would occur in my lifetime. We have indeed moved very fast on this. According to the Pew Research Center, 10 years ago, in 2005, Americans opposed the rights of same-sex couples to marry by a margin of 53 to 36. And that was an improvement from the year before. Now, Pew finds that Americans favor the rights of same-sex couples to marry by a margin of 57 to 39, a figure that aligns well with the CNN ORC poll that found that 59% of Americans say they agree with the Supreme Court ruling on same-sex marriage. Now, this does not, of course, mean the end of the matter. There will be legal questions to be decided, such as, for example, the tax-exempt status of religious colleges that provide housing for heterosexual couples but refuse to do it for same-sex couples. But more immediately, the right wing, like always, is stamping its feet, whining and sniveling about how unfair it all is and how they just ain't going to do it. The states of Louisiana and Mississippi have engaged in stalls, insisting that the Supreme Court ruling doesn't count because it contained no direct order to issue marriage licenses to same-sex couples. Alabama has gone so far as to suggest that the decision just doesn't apply in Alabama until its own state Supreme Court rules on the matter. In Texas, the Attorney General, his name is Ken Paxton, he's told county clerks in the state that they can refuse to issue marriage license to same-sex couples if they have a religious objection to same-sex marriage, because, he said, there is no order from a Texas court to do so. And same, he also said, applies to judges and justices of the peace, by the way. He even went so far to say that if a clerk gets sued over a refusal to issue a marriage license, quote, numerous lawyers stand ready to assist clerks defending their religious beliefs, in many cases on a pro bono basis, that means for free. And I will do everything I can from this office to be a public voice for those standing in defense of their rights. In other words, he is openly encouraging defiance of the order. Now, this is actually a legal question that got resolved a long, long time ago. Religious convictions do not release you from your obligations as a public official. If your religion burdens your duties, you cannot hold that office. Period. One such official, in fact, the Denton Texas County Clerk, Julie Lake, acknowledged in response to all this. She said that same-sex marriage, she said, is against my religion, but I took an oath to uphold the law, and I can't allow my personal beliefs to interfere with my duty to do my job. Which, again, seems so simple to me, it's hard to imagine somebody could have a problem with it. But, of course, the right wing doesn't care. They never care when the law or legal principles are applied to them. You know, the right wing that dominates the Texas government seems to be convinced that state law actually overrides federal law. And I sometimes wish Texas would just go ahead and secede, because I think they would be surprised at how few people would be sorry to see them go. Anyway, the thing is, most of this opposition, again, it's foot-dragging. It's stalling by people who have lost and know that they have lost. And it is likely done for local political reasons, as any other. But what this does point up is that this is not the end of the matter, which is why same-sex proponents are still trying to convince that 40% of the population that doesn't agree. Because even in the wake of this decision, this historic decision, LGBT folks still face legal discrimination in a host of areas and a host of states. And there are apparently, as this reaction to the decision made clear, there are more than enough people who still fear and loathe LGBT people to make continued work necessary. And there will continue, of course, to be massive doses of panic and pandering. And the latter, by the way, not only from the right. Don't make too much of this graphic, okay? Barack Obama has been a hypocrite on this from the word go. Back in the 1990s, when he was running for office in a state office in Illinois, he filled out a candidate's questionnaire in which he said he supported the right of same-sex marriage. When he came onto the public national stage, where that was an unpopular position, he was against it. But then as that opinion started to shift, then he said, well, he was evolving on the issue. And then finally, when it was safe to be in favor of same-sex marriage, then he's all for it. In fact, he just took each case, he took the position that was the politically safe position for him to take. So don't make too much out of this image. But the reason it's up is I really like it. I just like this image, and whoever was responsible for this at the White House did a cool thing, because it's celebrating an historic decision, and it's representing it as a celebration, as a people, as a nation, as a whole, and that's exactly as it should be. That's it for this week. You have the best week you possibly can. Peace.